Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly update for the worm farm. Today I'm starting with the bin that is normally my regular tote, that is the wetter one. And when I left the bubble wrap off of the side of the castings, this side dried out much faster than it has ever dried out before. It's actually kind of frustrating because usually it does get a little bit drier, but enough where I am okay with leaving it on for a week. But it dried to the point where I would be concerned about potential colony collapse. I'm glad I did leave the bubble wrap on the other side because where I put the food, all the worms have congregated over there to kind of stay away from the drier material. So this week I definitely want to mix all the castings all together because I don't want really dry patches and really wet patches going on in the bin. Since I want to get this to harvest, closer to a harvest like the other regular toad, I'm going to feed directly down the middle to encourage the worms to go throughout the castings, and I'm going to give them quite a large feeding of material, stuff that breaks down quick like squash, and then a piece of banana, which they really like. So I hope this does encourage them to migrate all the way through, help to break down some more of that cardboard in here, and then take this bin to harvest. I say it like every week, I feel like, but in the next 1 to 2 weeks I want to get this bin to harvest. Actually, not 1 to 2, 2 to 3 weeks. But for this bin is all set up for another week. Regular tote bin number 2, I also only put the bubble wrap on a part of that, and very clearly you can see how this one dried out, and it was drier than its sister bin, the tote that we just went over. And in here, of course, the worms escaped from the drier area by going over to where the bubble wrap kept a lot of the moisture in. So the process for this bin is going to be exactly the same as for the other regular tote, where I'm going to give it quite a large feeding right through the middle of the bin to add some moisture to it all throughout instead of actually adding water to it. And for this bin, I think that next week I could actually start the horizontal migration. I choose to do horizontal migration in the regular totes because it works really, really well. So I think this one is actually ready to begin that process. So as far as messing with this bin, I'm not going to do too much beyond the feeding and making sure the material is mixed up, and then setting it up for next week when I will begin the harvest. And I am making sure to spread the bubble wrap all over because I don't want any dry bits as well for this bin. Last cycle, I harvested this vermi bag tote on the same plan as the first 2 regular totes. But as I'm looking at this bin, it still has a lot more non-broken down material than the other 2 regular totes. So I don't know if this one is as close as I thought. The castings are coming along really well. The worms look nice and happy. And as it always seems to be in the vermi bag totes, the material has a great feel to it, a little on the dry side on the edges as usual. Now with the vermi bag totes, I don't hesitate to add a lot of moisture because they can handle it. They have a lot more chance of the water evaporating. So I gave this mostly a wet feeding of melon, and I'm going to add water to this bin, unlike what I did with my other bins, as the regular totes just hold on to water a little too much for me. So this bin, I think, is closer to a month away. Hopefully I'm overestimating when I would harvest, but I think this cycle I'm going to be harvesting at totally different times, which won't be too bad since I am doing the horizontal migration on both of my regular totes. But I'm going to wet this down really well after giving it a good feeding, and then set this up for another week. Moving on to my project vermi bag tote. This is the bin where for, I'd say it's been about 5 months now, I've been trying to rebuild the colony inside of this bin. First I was just keeping it small and just feeding it. Then I started the breeder bins for this one. So it has quite a bit of material in it. and it's not really going through a normal harvest cycle. All I'm doing is just trying to build the number of worms that are in here. The good news is I am seeing the evidence of additional worms, a lot of juvenile and small worms, and there is a good collection of more mature worms. So it seems that using the breeder bin is working out for me in here. I won't be able to do an assessment until I actually harvest this, which this is probably still another 3 to 4 months away from any harvest. I'm gonna add water to it because it does have a lot of dry spots in here, and the juvenile worms that I harvested out of the regular castings, I haven't added yet, and you'll see why in a moment. But for this bin, I've read that the juvenile worms have a good appetite, so I'm giving a large feeding to this bin, something where I haven't done before, and hopefully they will enjoy this feeding. But this bin is set up for the week, not messing around too much with it at all. Moving over to the breeder bin. So the actual breeder bin I changed by reducing the volume of castings in there since I didn't have a lot of worms. I don't do much with the breeder bin beyond make sure that the material is moistened and adding bits of food in. I do check on it more than my other bins to make sure it's not drying out and the worms are okay. But other than that, I don't do much to this. It's just for the worms to meet up and hopefully hatch more cocoons. It's in two pieces because I did harvest out the last cycle of material from the breeder bin. From what I read, you're supposed to let it go for about 30 days. So this is what was left over. And even though it looks dry on the top, both sides of this bin are wet. And this is what I was alluding to when I was talking about the other part, the third part of this project. I haven't added these because they are like clumpy, almost muddy like texture. And I don't want to add that to the bin and then cause the bin to have any imbalances with water retention. So I'm trying to let this dry out for a week or two. The small worms, which the camera definitely won't pick up, but there's a lot of small worms, a lot of cocoons throughout. So I'm going to give this a good size feeding for what I saw. I'm going to put the castings all to one side of the container. Maybe that will help encourage the moisture to come out of the castings, and then give this probably 1 or 2 more weeks to try to dry out, because I don't want it to dry out too fast. I am going to replace the bubble wrap over the whole entire castings and see how that works out. But the breeder bin project is updated for the next week. And my last and final bin, which is my only flow-through system, the Vermi Bag Midi. I do love this bin because I can put a lot of material and I really choose when I want to harvest this. I usually try to harvest it along with some of my other bins. But my focus for the last month or so has been on keeping these edges from being crispy. The edges of the bin really tend to dry out, and I found that by putting food around the edges, food that contains a higher water content, it does help with the edges. So I'm putting pieces of melon around the edges. This week I'm not putting anything in the middle because the very center of the castings is kind of mushy. So I don't know how that will relate in the end to the castings. So I'm going to hold off on putting anything in the middle. And I'm not going to add any material this week because I did 2 weeks of additions. But this bin, I'm not going to mess with too much this week. It's all set up. I hope you've enjoyed this update on the bins. If you've gotten this far, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe.